top streamers are weighing in on what they think about Cyberpunk 2077. I mean, it's coming up. It's right around the corner, the biggest game of all time, potentially. And one top streamer in particular, Shroud, says that he hopes the game dies in a month. Oh, you just got to see the clip yourself. Check it out.
To discover when you play it for yourself on December 10th.
Cyberpunk will die in a month? I hope so. I hope it's not larger than a month. It's a fucking single player game. I don't want to be spending fucking my whole life in here, you know? I want to be spending just enough time and then get out, you know?
Oh. Yeah, so there it is. Top streamer on Twitch is saying that he hopes this game will die in a month. Is Shroud some sort of Cyberpunk 2077 hating villain? Or is this highlighting some greater strategic point about Cyberpunk 2077? I mean, if you look at the top streamers on Twitch, boys, none of them are playing single player games, obviously. And so this game is going to be very disruptive to the entire creator community. I mean, let me ask you this, Perrin. As a top streamer, do you feel like folks like Shroud and all the others at the top that normally play competitive esports games and multiplayer games are almost forced to play this single player game just because of how popular it's going to be?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this one has so much hype going into it that their audiences are basically expecting them to cover it. And if they don't, as top streamers, if they don't cover it, they will actually lose their audience to other people who are covering it, to other big streamers. So at the top there, you got to remember, like, once you do the top and you've made it, you know, things aren't just rosy and green and like life's great. You still have to compete with all of the other top streamers. And if you aren't covering this, it's basically a free win for all of your competition. Everybody who was expecting you to play it would go to another stream, and that will be a sizable chunk of the audience. Will some people stay around? Let's say Shroud just does Valorant more, and will some of his audience stick around? Sure, they will, but he's definitely going to lose out a bunch of his audience to another streamer, and he doesn't want that. So he's going to cover this hopefully as quickly as he can, or he hopes so anyway, so that then he can get back to doing multiplayer games, which are his bread and butter.
Ross, what are your thoughts on, top streamers right now covering this game? Do you think this game has longer than a 1 month timeline in terms of being relevant for streamers, or is it going to be a spike trend that dies like the rest?
It's initially it's going to be big. I mean, I think he has a point about the single player aspect. I think we would have a lot more answers if we actually knew what the timeline on multiplayer for this game is going to be. The only thing we know right now is that multiplayer is going to come out after the first DLC. And we also know that CD Projekt Red is treating Cyberpunk's multiplayer like its own entity, like its own game. So it's almost going to be a completely separate game. So I think that almost brings up the question, is there any strategy where you can ignore Cyberpunk's single player game and then jump in when the multiplayer releases? Or do you have to get your foot in the door now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So we have run strategies in the past and grown multiple YouTube channels and what have you, and done our own strategies in the past with various games and covering them pre-release. And then when you cover them pre-release and you hype up these games, you can build an audience for a game that doesn't exist, right? So that when the game drops, your audience is primed and ready, and you can stream to that audience, and you can end up benefiting from the audience that you built pre-release. Now, top streamers like Shroud, they already have a massive audience. So if they stream to, on Twitch, Cyberpunk 2077, they're basically guaranteed to get views from that. That's great. But for the rest of you, how do you get an audience for this game? So right in the launch window of mega titles, and we've covered mega titles in the past, Perrin, we've done this a bunch actually in the past, and right in the launch window, every YouTuber on the whole planet is going to jump on board Cyberpunk 2077. So as a small creator, there's virtually no growth opportunity for you when this game launches. But the window you want to be looking at actually is after the game launches. You want to be looking at those times and those opportunities and that content that allows you to punch through when the competition is lower. And I know you have successfully built audiences that way, Perrin, so why don't you tell us about some of your experiments in the past capitalizing on game launches so that people who are looking to cover Cyberpunk 2077 can learn from them.
Yeah, and so one of my greatest successes as a live streamer and content creator came from like pre-building on a trend. I did this with an old MMORPG that doesn't exist anymore, actually, called WildStar. And a year in advance, a whole entire year, I started doing YouTube content. I built a website, like a fan site for it, and I live streamed anything I could find as much as I possibly could. Before that, I did it with Star Wars: The Old Republic, with you too, AWOL. We pre-built content for a year or even further in advance, regularly taking any nugget of new info and just expanding and building as much content as we could based off of that. We were able to grow a really sizable audience with basically no competition doing that. Now, nowadays, that strategy is more caught on, so you will have more competition. And with a game like CyberPunk, even if you had started a year or more ago, you would have had some competition. But it's the better time as a small or medium-sized creator to build, because then when the game does launch, you have an audience that can pull you through, but you're still not going to grow when it launches, because you have to compete with literally the rest of the internet. So you're not going to be able to grow there. Your growth mainly comes from pre-launch content. So if you haven't already done that, it's probably too late on CyberPunk for that now. That's something you want to look at a year in advance. And then the one thing to expect is after launch, you're not going to have much to do after launch. Your viewership will go down. Your concurrence will go down. Your views will go down in most cases. There are cases where creators have built their success off of this. Typical gamer, AWOL comes to mind, who did this for GTA 5, but GTA 5 was like one of the biggest games ever to hit. Maybe that could be done with Cyberpunk 2077. We will see. It's a gamble every time on how well the game is going to do. And if the game does really, really well, you could blow up like typical gamer. If the game fails and doesn't even exist anymore, like WildStar, you could end up like me. So it can go both ways. But it's a good strategy to do, but it's caught on and is more competitive now than it used to be.
Well, let's talk about what people could do potentially to win on Cyberpunk 2077. So for all of you guys out there, first of all, that are planning to stream this game when it launches, I can understand the idea of, I'm going to be playing this game anyway, so why not stream it? That's cool. Just so you know, this will probably be statistically, and we will analyze this afterwards. Statistically, this will probably be the worst game you have ever streamed in terms of your performance. Now, there's going to be some exceptions, but I think as far as like record-breaking numbers for launches of games, this game will have the highest streaming numbers of all time. And so the competition will be maximum here. And so your discoverability streaming Cyberpunk 2077 on any platform, even DLive, Trovo, Facebook Gaming, etc., for all of you guys out there that are restreaming, because we've recommended it in the past, your odds of breaking through on any platform are next to none, especially with this game. Think like Fortnite at its most popular state times like 3, 4, 5 within this launch window of the first week of the game coming out. So if you just want to stream for fun, if you don't care if your viewership is way lower than normal, if you're cool just streaming to just a few viewers, that's great. But just keep in mind that there are big creators out there that have been pre-planning their Cyberpunk 2077 launch content, and they're planning to go big with this. Like Dr. Disrespect, for example, has a whole production planned. He's been hyping up and talking about. It's my guess that he's got entire skits, sets, graphics packages, shorts, collaborations with CD Projekt Red. Like, we're talking maybe like a six-figure, like he dropped maybe a couple $100,000 if I were to guess, on planning for the launch of this game. So if you're a YouTube streamer, for example, that's who you're competing against, is this like AAA production streamer who has been doing way more planning than you have in building up their audience waiting for this moment. So that in mind, building up your audience waiting for this moment is the strategy you need to be thinking of if you're looking to cover a game like Cyberpunk 2077